We are obviously super excited to have Chef Kenji Lopez-Alt with us. Many of you know Chef Lopez-Alt as the managing culinary director of Serious Eats, or maybe from his James Beard Award-nominated column, The Food Lab. He's an MIT grad. He's a restaurant chain chef. He is husband of a Googler. Good job, us. And now he is author of the new book, The Food Lab, Better Home Cooking Through Science. So, Chef, Kenji, my close personal friend.
Yes.
Welcome to Google.
Everybody's close personal friend. Thank you. Thank you. It's really, it's really amazing to be here. Everybody here is way smarter than me, which is really intimidating. But hopefully, I think I'm better at cooking eggs than everybody here, so that makes me feel a little better.
And you also have your wife.
And my wife is here, yeah.
You guys are combined.
Moral support, yeah.
Super smart.
Yes, she's here, and she pays my health insurance too. Google pays my health insurance.
You're welcome.
Although I just realized if it weren't for my health insurance, I would never have gone to my doctor, and I would not have found out that I have high cholesterol. So basically, everybody here is responsible for my high cholesterol, I think. Anyhow. My wife told me that last night I did an event also at the San Francisco Cooking School, and she told me that the big mistake I made last night was not telling everybody at the very beginning what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to tell everybody what I'm going to be doing, which is cooking eggs, and showing you all the different things that eggs can do. Not all the different things, but some of the different things that eggs can do. Because eggs are, I mean, they're amazing. They come out of chickens or other birds. These ones come out of chickens. Most eggs that we eat come out of chickens. And you can eat them, but they also have these really unique chemical and physical properties that help us sort of manipulate other foods into neat things. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you a sort of unique method of poaching eggs that will make you the star of brunch. And then I'm going to show you how you can use eggs to make a really foolproof mayonnaise and a really foolproof hollandaise, which will also make you the star of brunch. And then we're going to talk a little bit about salads, because, well, the poached eggs we have are going to go into a Brussels sprout salad that the kitchen is preparing, which I think everybody can eat afterwards. Is that right?
Absolutely.
I think so, yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about salads and vinaigrettes. So eggs, then emulsions with eggs, and then emulsions without eggs. And that's what we're doing. So the first one is poached eggs. So I don't know how many of you have tried poaching an egg before. It's not extremely easy. Even in a restaurant. I used to work in a restaurant in Boston where I was in charge of breakfast, and so there were days of the week when I had to go in at 6 in the morning and start poaching eggs for breakfast service. And I would say, for my first month there at least, I probably had like a 30% success rate. We ended up eating a lot of eggs for family meal because the eggs break, they fall apart, the egg whites turn all wispy in there, and it's really, really difficult to get a nice, perfectly poached eggs. And you'll find that there's people that tell you many different ways to do it. What I was taught was that you take your pot, you have water, you salt the water, and actually I am going to salt the water a little bit. You salt the water, and then I was told to put vinegar in the water. Because it helps the egg whites set a little bit faster. And then I was taught to stir a vortex into it like this, break my eggs into a separate little container, and then pour it gently into the middle of that vortex. And supposedly the vortex is supposed to help the egg maintain like a nice, sort of torpedo shape. The idea is that as it falls into that vortex, it swirls around like this, and because the egg white and the egg yolk have a different density, it kind of leaves like a trail, kind of like a comet going around. So the yolk will go in the front, the white will trail behind it, and that's supposed to give it a really nice shape. But in reality, what happens is you end up breaking half your eggs. They swirl around in there, and then you end up with like egg drop soup, and you have to start over, and it's not fun. It's not fun. Any line cook who's had to poach a lot of eggs can tell you it's not easy. So what we're actually going to do instead is we're going to take our eggs. These are eggs. I already showed you eggs before, didn't I? Now, the one thing you want to do, what you want to make sure when you're poaching eggs is that your eggs are really, really fresh. You want them to be like within a couple weeks of having coming out of the chicken. If you can get them like the day of, that's even better. But what happens is, let me break open an egg and show you something here. So when you break open an egg, So immediately what you see is obviously two things. There's the white and the yolk. But actually, there are really three phases in an egg. So there is the yolk, which is inside its own little sac, its own membrane. There's the white, which is also in its own membrane. But then there's also all this loose white, which is around, which is not within that same little sac as the main part of the white. And that excess loose white, that's the problem. That's what makes your eggs fall apart in there.
That's what gets all wispy and flying around.
Exactly, that's what gets all wispy. And the thing is, the older your egg is, the weaker the membranes in there are going to be. So the higher the chance is going to be that you're going to break your eggs when it falls into the water, or that there's going to be too much of that loose white. So what you really want to do when you're going to poach eggs is find the freshest eggs you can. There's a couple of ways you can tell how fresh an egg is. The first one is to just look at the box, because they all have a sell-by date. The sell-by date, by law, has to be within 30 days of the time that the egg was packed into the carton. But it can be anywhere within that 30-day range. So the real number you're looking for is what's called the Julian date, and it'll be a 3-digit number on the carton right next to the sell-by date. And that 3-digit number is the day that the eggs were packed and it goes 1 to 365, obviously. As I just found out, when you search for what is the 252nd day of the year, Google doesn't immediately give you an answer. You have to go to a chart. So maybe someone can get on that. The other way, if you really have no idea, another way you can tell your eggs is by you get a cup of water, and I don't know how many of you have really closely looked at a hard-boiled egg. I'm sure most of you here have eaten a hard-boiled egg. So when you peel a hard-boiled egg, along this fat end, you sometimes see this like little divot, this little bubble in there. And that bubble is in there naturally, and it always forms on this side. As the egg gets older and older, the shell is slightly porous, so it will actually lose moisture. And particularly in the U.S., because eggs in the U.S. are washed before packing. So there's when it comes out of the chicken, there's this kind of natural waxy cuticle on it that is also a weather barrier. So European eggs, you might notice if you go to Europe, eggs are stored at room temperature, whereas in the US they're stored in the fridge. And the reason for that is because in Europe they don't wash the eggs after they come out of the chicken, so that waxy cuticle is intact. So it actually helps protect the egg from losing moisture. It also helps protect it from bacterial infection from the outside. In the US, they wash them first, so they start out cleaner, but they're also more vulnerable to other things. But anyhow, what happens is the moisture comes out, and as the moisture comes out, that bubble in there gets bigger and bigger. So a very, very fresh egg, and we're going to see how fresh this one is. So there you go. So a very, very fresh egg will lay on its side like that. As the egg gets older and older, you're going to see that it's going to start floating. Well, initially it'll start standing up with its fat end up. And eventually, if it gets really old, it's going to actually float. And at that point, you don't really want to do anything other than throw it at people. So these are fresh eggs, which is good. But as I pointed out, even with a very fresh egg, there's still a good amount of that really liquidy white. And that's your enemy. So the secret to getting rid of that is you just use a strainer. And you just pour your egg right in there. And you can see all the liquid white drips off. And that's all stuff that would have gone into your pot of water and clouded it up and made those little wispy things. And once you have your basically clean, tight white and tight yolk in there, you can very gently lower it into the water like this and just kind of roll it out. And I don't know, is there a way for people to see in there? I don't know if there's a way for people to see in there, but it looks awesome. And then once it's in there, you give it a couple of little stirs, because the one thing you don't want to happen is for that egg to stick on the bottom. Because even though you're in a pot of water, the bottom of the pot, the metal on the bottom of the pot is going to conduct heat into the egg, obviously faster than the water is. So you want to make sure that it stays moving a little bit. And this is just going to take about maybe 45 seconds to a minute. And once you have an egg in there, you can do any number of them. It gets pretty easy once you get going at this. Egg whites come out, and egg goes in. And I think that first one is nearly done already, actually. So I'm just going to grab a slotted spoon here and fish it out. And there. So you can see it's like a perfectly tight white. There's nothing, no like wispy bits coming out. It's like, I mean, it's like this is a picture perfect poached egg. That's what you're looking for. Thank you. Now, even though that's really easy and pretty much foolproof, but I use the word fool resistant. There's a lot of engineers in here, I'm sure, and I'm sure that you know, every time you make something foolproof, then a bigger fool comes around. So it's a fool resistant method. I'm sure someone's going to mess it up, but even though it's pretty foolproof, it's still a bit of effort to do while you're trying to say you have like 6 or 8 friends over for brunch and you want to make eggs Benedict for everybody. That's like a dozen eggs you have to poach. So that's going to tie you up in the kitchen for a while. So a much easier way to do it is to actually poach your eggs off the day before, or even up to a few days before, and then transfer them to a bowl of water, cold water. You can take this bowl and put it in your fridge and leave it for up to 3 days, and the eggs are just going to stay perfectly poached. They're not going to cook anymore, obviously, and they're not going to lose any quality. And then the day that you want to serve your brunch, you take your poached egg and just put it right back into hot water for about 15, 30 seconds, and then you have a nice hot poached egg. And you can do, you do 12 of them, dump them into a pot of water, and that's like brunch for everyone within a couple minutes, which is really nice, I think.
My life just changed forever. Unbelievable.
All right, so this is poached eggs, and it's a lot of poached eggs, actually. All right, so now we're going to talk about, now I'm going to dump this out, actually. And then I'm going to get some butter melting, because we're going to make some hollandaise to go with that poached egg. This is a lot of butter. It's a pound, I think. A pound of unsalted butter. I don't know how these things work. It says 1,000. What does 1,000 mean? Okay. I want 1,001. No. Okay. 1,000's good. Maybe it's watts. I don't know. All right. So, one of the other cool properties of eggs, and particularly egg yolks, is that they contain lecithin. And lecithin is it's an emulsifier. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what an emulsion is, but an emulsion is essentially when you take two liquids that are immiscible and force them to mix. So when you take, in cooking, it's almost always a water-based liquid and a fat-based liquid. So like a traditional vinaigrette, which we'll make in a bit, butter is an emulsion. There's water in there. There's about, off the top of my head, if I'm right, I think it's like 15% water and about 80% fat and a few other percents of protein. And then what we're going to make now is mayonnaise and hollandaise, which are both emulsions. They're both fat in water emulsions. Now, in order to get things to emulsify, what you need is, a lot of mechanical stirring, first of all, and then also an emulsifier. An emulsifier is any sort of agent that has one hydrophobic end and one hydrophilic end. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking your tiny droplets of fat or your tiny droplets of water, surrounding it on all sides with emulsifiers. So if you think of them as like little sperm going into an egg, they're all kind of jammed. They got their heads jammed in there. So if you have a fat molecule, all the hydrophilic ends are jammed into the fat molecule, which leaves the exterior hydrophobic, which makes it. Or did I reverse that? I reversed it. Anyhow, you know what I mean. So it makes it so that those fat molecules can then be evenly distributed in water. So the way you would traditionally make a mayonnaise is kind of a pain in the butt. I'm going to do it right here, and it's probably going to fail because I haven't done it in so long. So what you do is you take your egg, just the yolk. We're going to do a little bit of lemon juice. A little bit of water. I think this is water. We'll see. And then a little bit of mustard. Mustard also is a pretty good emulsifier. For this one, let's do a little bit of garlic too. I like to use a microplane for my garlic, although some people, I think Anthony Bourdain and Alton Brown hate garlic presses. I don't mind garlic presses. I think they work fine. But I generally use a microplane because I have it around. All right, so to make a classic mayonnaise, you start out with an egg yolk, mustard, lemon juice, and the real trick to making a mayonnaise is that you have to add the oil really, really slowly. Oh, actually, someone in the kitchen there. Could someone grab me like a quart of canola oil?
Yes.
Yes. We'll start this one with olive oil just because I have it here. The trick is to add the oil really, really slowly, and the idea there is that by adding it slowly, you're able to break down the droplets into very, very, very fine droplets, and that's what you need because if they're too large, they end up attracting each other. And I like to think of it sort of as like a high school dance where there's the water's the boys and the oil's the girls, or maybe the other way around. Oh, thank you. And if you let them get into once the boys start forming a little clump, all the other boys are like, oh, there's boys, I'm going to go over there. And they glom onto them, and then you end up with people on separate sides of the dance floor, and that's not what you want. You really want to maybe give them a little alcohol, less things like the alcohol of the mayonnaise party. Give them a little bit of alcohol, help them mix together, and then keep them separated. So, very little bit at a time. Whisk very furiously.
Cardiovascular for the day. Maybe you didn't want to do arms at the gym. You just make mayonnaise.
Okay, I'm not going to bore you making this fully, but you can see it starts to form this nice creamy sauce. And as you add more and more oil, it's actually going to get thicker and thicker. And that's one of the interesting properties of an emulsion is that an emulsion is thicker than either of the two ingredients on their own, always. And that's just because of the way they rub together when they're trying to move around in there. So that's how you would make a traditional mayo. It's definitely not foolproof, and it takes some practice. So what we're going to do is make a foolproof mayo, full resistant mayo. Actually, could we get even a little more oil? Like one more little bottle? Because this is a pretty big container.
You can have all of our oil. We'll line it up for you.
So I'm going to put an egg in there. This time I'm actually just going to leave the white in there. You can leave the white in if you want. And I'll just leave out the water because egg whites are mostly water anyway. Egg white, lemon juice. Let's give it more garlic. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Value side. This is the Costco container. The mustard. All right. And now, remember before I told you that you have to add the oil really slowly to a mayonnaise?
Uh-oh. What's happening?
So what we're going to do is we're just going to dump this in. All the way. And that's what happens if you add oil too fast to a mayonnaise. It obviously doesn't mix. But if you have one of these guys, an immersion blender. So the idea here is that if you can see it, all of the water-based liquid is at the bottom. All of the oil is at the top. And now this guy is going to create a vortex. And that vortex is going to very slowly draw the oil down into the water. So by sticking this all the way to the bottom and turning it on, we're going to basically do what we were doing before. Very, very slowly add the oil to the water phase, the oil phase to the water phase. And unless I've suddenly become a bigger fool, this will hopefully work. I think it will work. Ready? I think it's working.
Seriously, where have you been all of my culinary life? Look at this.
And then season with a little salt. pepper. And that's mayonnaise, see? I don't know how this works.
It's an immersion blender.
This is an immersion blender. Yeah, you can get them for about, I think like Cuisinart makes one for 35 bucks, yeah. And this will be like way better than anything you ever get out of a jar. Yeah, tastes like mayonnaise.
How long would that keep in the fridge?
So if I put the garlic and the lemon juice in there, so those are the things that are really going to kill it. If you did it with like no garlic and did it with just like vinegar instead of lemon juice, it will last weeks. As long as commercial mayo did, basically. With the garlic and lemon juice, you'll start to taste like maybe some funny off flavors after 1.5 weeks or so.
So the lemon juice is for flavor more than for the acid?
Yeah, well, for both. It's for flavor, it's for acidity. Brightness, because mayonnaise made with just water. You can make mayonnaise with just water and oil, but it tastes greasy and gross. Yeah, you want acid in there to really give it brightness. And I usually put quite a bit of acid in there. This one is less acid than I normally would. One thing you want to make sure. A lot of people make mayonnaise with olive oil. The one thing you don't want to do is do exactly what I just did with just pure olive oil. And the reason is that olive oil, it'll oxidize if it comes into contact with too much air, and if you mix it too violently. It has aromatic compounds in there that shear and oxidize, and it'll develop some really bitter flavors. So I don't know if you've ever tried putting olive oil in a blender and tasting it afterwards. Like, just that action, just like putting it in a blender and blending it for 10 seconds, it makes it taste disgusting. So if you want to make a really like olive oily mayonnaise, start with about half the amount of canola oil or vegetable oil, some kind of neutral oil. Start with about half the amount, get your mayonnaise stable, then transfer it to a bowl, add your olive oil and whisk it in. And once you have a really nice stable base, it's actually pretty easy to whisk more oil into it. It's not going to break. So there we have mayonnaise. Now the question is, how do you make hollandaise? And hollandaise, once you know how to make mayonnaise, hollandaise is like, it's basically the exact same thing. The only difference is that instead of oil, you're using butter, another fat. Hollandaise is one of these sauces that is, again, like the bane of a brunch cook's existence. It has all the difficulties of mayonnaise, getting an proper emulsion to form, all of that. Plus, it's also very temperature sensitive. In order for, if it gets too cool, butter is a highly saturated fat, which means that, I don't know if you're familiar with the shape of a fat molecule, but it basically looks like an E. Like it's got one, 3 fatty acids and a glyceride. It's got a glyceride chain and fatty acids sticking out of it. Those fatty acids each have they have kinks in them based on how saturated or unsaturated the fat is. So when it's fully saturated, that means that every single location on that fatty acid has a carbon? A hydrogen? A hydrogen, yes, thank you. It has a hydrogen on it, which makes the legs straight. When it is missing some of those hydrogens, those legs end up kinking. So when you have a non-fully saturated fat, it has kinked legs, which means that it doesn't stack very easily. The molecules don't pack very tightly. Highly saturated fats like butter, they tend to come from animals: butter, beef fat, pork fat, duck fat. You'll find that because they stack so nicely, they're solids at room temperature. So obviously you can't make mayonnaise out of a solid. So hollandaise is difficult because if the butter fat gets too cool, it becomes a solid. It breaks out of its emulsion. But if it gets too hot, you end up cooking the egg yolks. So it's really this balancing game. But when you use this method, it solves a lot of those problems again. Could I grab some more eggs too? Just a couple more. Probably actually won't need them. We'll see. With the hollandaise, it's a little bit more of an egg sauce than a mayonnaise is. So I like to use about 4 to 6 eggs per pound of butter. Egg yolks again. Got 1, 2, 3. All right. Anybody know any good jokes about eggs?
What do you do with your egg whites?
make souffles out of them, or make meringues out of them, or yeah, any one of those things.
Once you separate
or
them,
make egg white omelets.
how long can you keep them?
Oh, a long time, and you can freeze them. They put them in a container, freeze them. They freeze really well. Yeah. Yeah.
If you don't like to blend olive oils, then you like to make pesto in the blender?
So you don't want to make pesto in the blender because it's not the best way to get flavor. You want to make pesto in a mortar and pestle. You rupture a lot more. So a blender is actually too violent and it's too sharp. So it'll separate plant cells like at their walls. So you actually don't extract as much flavor. Thank you. When you blend like basil, you don't extract as much flavor out of it as you do when you really grind it in a mortar and pestle. When you make your pesto, you want to get a nice granite mortar and pestle. And this is one of the rare cases where like the really old-fashioned way actually is the best way to do it. You want a granite mortar and pestle, salt, which is also an abrasive, and it'll help you break it down more. And that'll make you better pesto. But to answer your initial question, if you are going to make your pesto in a blender or in a food processor, it's actually relatively okay to put olive oil in there, and it's because all that solid matter really protects the olive oil from getting sheared by the blade spinning. So you don't notice the effect nearly as much when you have a lot of solid matter in there. This is always my favorite part. Okay. So again, I'm a little nervous at this point because I know when you do things live, they never work the way they're supposed to, but we'll see.
Let's just launch and iterate. We just launch and iterate.
All right, same thing here. Eggs, a little lemon juice. And then we got hot butter here. I'm using a thermometer that I borrowed from someone over there. Let's see. Right now it is, it's like close to 200 degrees, which is maybe a little hotter than I want it, but we'll do. Hopefully it won't scramble the eggs before we're done. What did I do with that blender? Here. So, the process is pretty much exactly the same. The only difference is in this case, you can't add the, you can't pour the butter on top because if all that hot butter sits on top of the eggs, it ends up cooking the eggs. So this one you do have to you got to double fist it and do one hand here, one hand here. Okay, we got this going. Ready? Hold your breath. And as the butter goes in, it's going to emulsify, but it's also going to slightly cook those egg yolks, which is kind of what you want in a hollandaise. It'll make it really nice and thick. And what you want to do is pour off all of the sort of clear yellow fat. And I don't know if you can see into this pot, but there's a bunch of white liquid left at the bottom, and that's basically the water phase of the butter that's left down there, along with some dissolved proteins. Really all you want is the fat in here. If it ends up too thick, you can add some of that water phase, but this one looks like it's pretty good. And we'll season it with salt again. Some people like to put cayenne in there. I'll do just some salt. That tastes like hollandaise. And wait, let me show you how cool this looks. Wait, let's get some of those eggs from before. Grab a paper towel. So these eggs are a little cold, but imagine that they're warm. You don't have to imagine because you can't taste. These eggs are warm.
Steamy.
Perfect serving temperature.
How long in advance can you make hollandaise? How long will it stay?
That one you do have to kind of make
Kind of en minute.
A la minute. Yeah. So if you have a really nice, like heavy pot. I mean, even this will do with a tightly sealing lid. You can put a lid on it and let it keep under its own. Like put it in a kind of warm spot on your oven, and it'll last. You might find that depending on if it gets slightly too warm, it's going to start to thicken. And egg proteins, even at the same temperature, like say you're holding them at 160 degrees, even if you're holding them at 160 degrees, over time they'll thicken more and more. So if you hold your hollandaise for 45 minutes, it's gonna get pretty thick. If you hold it for 2 hours, it'll probably be solid. It's rescuable. You can always whisk in a little bit more liquid to save it, but it's never going to be quite the same as when you first made it. So it is one of the things I would recommend making a la minute. Oops, I broke that egg. I spent too long talking to you. All right. So I poached the egg perfectly, and then I broke it when I started plating.
Nobody saw but me.
And this is what is going to get your friends to love you on brunch. There, and that's hollandaise for you. What time are we at now? Do I have time to go into another?
5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes left, and does that include questions and answers?
Additional questions and answers.
After this. Okay, all right, we're going to do one last thing.
We did start 5 minutes late. So do we get an
Okay.
extra 5 minutes?
We're good. So I'm not going to bother cooking the Brussels sprouts because that's going to take too long. But we are going to do, I'm going to talk quickly about vinaigrettes. So a vinaigrette is also an emulsion, also a oil and water emulsion. Generally, the water-based element is a acid, like lemon juice or vinegar. And then, can I grab, so I need some more lemons too. Used up all my lemons. So again, making a vinaigrette the traditional way is actually very similar to making a mayonnaise. You would start with your acid, maybe a little bit of mustard, maybe a shallot or two in a bowl. Start whisking it, and then slowly drizzle in your oil. And you end up with an emulsion. Because there's no lecithin in there, the emulsion is not quite as strong as it is in a mayonnaise, and that's why a mayonnaise is so thick and gloppy, whereas a vinaigrette is loose and creamy. So people sometimes ask, why do you need to make a vinaigrette? Why can't I just put oil and vinegar on my salad? Like they do at the Italian restaurants. They come around with like the little caddy of, thank you, oil and vinegar. And the question is, why can't you just put them on separately and toss it all together? And so I wanted to quickly demonstrate what happens if you do that. So I have this bowl here. In this first bowl, we're going to put some salad greens. And imagine that I'm measuring everything here really precisely. We're going to put some salad greens, and we're going to do just oil in it, about a tablespoon of oil. Okay? I'm going to toss those together. And then I'm going to put them in this strainer. And grab a clean bowl. Excuse me. Can you still hear me from here?
It's like Top Chef. We're going to make them run all over the place, set the timer.
All right. So we're going to put it in a clean bowl. And we're going to watch what happens there. Then the next one, I'm going to take about the same amount of greens. And we're going to add some lemon juice to them. Also about a tablespoon or so of lemon juice. Toss them, and then I'm going to put them in here. And then the final bowl, we're going to make a vinaigrette. I'm going to do it in a jar instead of the traditional way. No, I'll do it the traditional way. So, lemon juice. A little mustard. And my whisk went. I don't know where my whisk went. I'll grab another one.
Run, run!
I don't know. Are those all set up for someone afterwards? I don't know if I'm stealing someone else's.
You're welcome to use any of our tools.
So basically the same as the mayonnaise. We're going to drizzle in some olive oil pretty slowly. For a vinaigrette, I usually like to go about a 3-to-1 ratio of oil to water-based liquid. Say again?
What's the emulsifier now?
What's the emulsifier?
Mustard, yeah. But mustard is not as strong as lecithin, so which is why it doesn't really doesn't hold an emulsion as well. You know, and even without an emulsifier, it's possible to get like a relatively loose emulsion but it'll eventually separate. But this one you see, like it's pretty creamy. That's a pretty good emulsion there. So this one we're gonna also throw some salad greens. Add a couple of tablespoons of this. Toss it all together. And then, where did I put that clean bowl? Lose my last clean bowl. Let's go with this bowl. Okay. Okay, there we go. And hopefully this is actually going to work out the way it's supposed to. Sometimes it does. All right, so this one was tossed with oil. And you can see like basically nothing drips into the bowl. And that's because leaves have this kind of natural waxy coating on them. It's so that when they're out in the rain just rolls off of them instead of soaking into them. So oil actually binds really well to salad greens and to leaves of all kinds. And actually, if you've ever seen your salad greens start to go limp, it's the oil that's doing it. It's not the acid, it's not the water, it's the oil. So you can see like here it's already starting to go limp, and that's because the oil is soaking into the leaves and saturating the cells. So no dripping from oil. So it's good because the oil sticks to the leaves and that's where you want it because that's where you get the flavor, but it's bad because it ruins your greens. Now we go to the one with the acid, and this is the one that I hope worked. And imagine that the bowl has a lot of stuff down there.
Tons
if we had
of
let
stuff.
it sit a little bit longer, you would have probably seen it. Or if this thing had bigger holes in it. Oh yeah, it's all pooling at the bottom of the thing. Anyhow, your acid basically just it just runs off the leaves. It doesn't really stick to them, and that's bad because you need that bright acidity to make your salad taste good. So the point of a vinaigrette is that you get your acid and oil to play nicely together, and then here again, no drippage. It coats the leaves nicely, but now coating the leaves is oil plus acid. So you get the flavor from the olive oil, you also get the flavor from the acid. The leaves are protected from the effects of the oil because of that water-based element. And so that's the reason why you want to actually form a really nice tight vinaigrette and not just haphazardly throw things on your salad. And it's also why it doesn't work to just kind of add extra vinegar at the table or add whatever. You need to really make a nice vinaigrette if you want a nice salad. Actually, I had a really nice salad from here for lunch, and I'm pretty sure they did it right. Anyhow, I think that's it. That's emulsions and oil and eggs. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we do, Victoria, have time to take questions, yes? So
Yeah.
Forgive me, it's super dorky. I'm going to repeat your questions so that those people who are watching the video later can hear it. Otherwise, they're just going to hear the answers. So bear with me. Chef in the front, did you have a question? So does the whisking taint the flavor of the olive oil the same way you spoke about the blender kind of shearing it?
I mean, I wish that my hands were as powerful as blenders, but they're not. So no, it's because I'm much more gentle. Yeah.
How do you design experiments, varying ingredients?
Well, it's a lot. I mean, like any kind of experiment. So a lot of it comes down to the way you design an experiment. A lot of it comes down to sort of intuition and experience in the field. So I have a good idea of what is likely to work, and I think that's the case in any sort of scientific field. Like the difference between a good scientist and a bad scientist, it comes down a lot to intuition and sort of general background knowledge of the field. So a lot of what I decide to test comes down to that, and then when I'm doing the actual experiments. It really is, fifth grade science stuff. Isolate the variable, have a control, make sure you eliminate bias as much as possible, and I do different types of recipes and different types of experiments. So for ones where it's like very easily where you can very easily empirically measure things like how well does mustard emulsify versus an egg yolk. I mean, that one's pretty easy to do because it doesn't come down to subjective taste. A lot of experiments do end up coming down to subjective taste, and so for those. Often it's just my own palate, you know, and I think that's sort of one of the differences between me and my former employer at Cooks Illustrated. What we did there was we would have big panels of people tasting, you know, this one has half a teaspoon of lemon juice, that one has a teaspoon of lemon juice. Which one do you prefer? And so there you end up with a recipe that sort of pleases a lot of people, but I also think lacks personality. So what I do is I do the one that pleases me most, and I explain to you why it pleases me. But you know, but if you like less lemon juice in your thing, the idea is that I'm trying to arm you with enough sort of basic cooking technique and scientific knowledge to be able to modify the recipe to your own taste, and still be sure that it's going to work.
Excellent. Yes.
In the first part where you were poaching the eggs, was the water at a mild simmer or below a simmer?
What's the temp of the eggs or the water when you're poaching the eggs?
It was below a simmer. So the main reason I like to keep it below a simmer is actually just a physical one. I don't want the bubbles coming up there and interfering with the eggs and jostling them around too much. Partly, I also don't want the metal at the bottom of the pan to be too hot. So ideally, when I poach eggs, what I do is I get like a rather large pot. I'll bring it to a boil, then I'll shut it off, and then I'll add the eggs to it. So the water temperature is probably within the, I mean, above 180 degrees, below 200 degrees, around that range.
What temp should the eggs themselves be?
So, okay, that's a good question. So I actually like to use fridge cold eggs for poaching, and the main reason is that those tight whites and tight yolks are actually more viscous when they're cold from the fridge, so it makes it easier to do that straining step. If they come all the way to room temperature, there's a small chance, especially with slightly older eggs, there's a small chance that doing that step you're going to end up breaking the shell, the membrane around the white, and you definitely don't want that to happen. So I like to use fridge cold eggs for poaching.
What got you interested in food science?
What got me interested in science? Well, I can tell you, Don Herbert, Mr. Wizard, if you grew up in the 80s
Yes!
or in the 50s, you knew him. He got me interested in science, along with, I mean, I come from a family with many scientists, so I was always interested in science. I got interested in food basically because it was the summer after my sophomore year in college, and I wanted to take a summer off of academic work, so I went around looking for a job as a waiter. And I walked into a restaurant and they said, we don't have any waiter positions, but we have a prep cook who didn't show up this morning. So as long as you know how to hold a knife, we'll give you a job in the kitchen. And I lied and I said, I know how to hold a knife. And I got a job working in the kitchen and sort of faked my way through it for several years. But as soon as I went into a kitchen, I was like, oh, this is the life for me. You know, I loved working in restaurants. So the way I got interested in food science is that I got interested in science, then I got interested in food, and I was like, oh, here are these two things I can put together. Worked out. Yeah, well, I mean, a vinaigrette is a very good example of that. I use 1 part water-based liquid, so that can be lemon juice, vinegar, and then 3 parts oil. And then about maybe up to 1 part in addition to that, and this is all the liquids you can do by volume, but 1 part by weight of additional aromatics. So it can be garlic, it can be shallots, it can be some kind of like barbecue spice blend, powdered ranch dressing mix, whatever you want. But yeah, like a vinaigrette, you want a 3-to-1 ratio of oil to water. That's a good one. I would actually recommend getting Michael Ruhlman's book. Michael Ruhlman's one of my idols, a great food writer. He has a book called Ratio, which is specifically about that question.
How do you go about adding vinegar to your...
How do you feel about, I think you said, how do you feel about adding vinegar to your poaching liquid for eggs?
Vinegar to the poaching liquid?
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
So adding vinegar to the poaching liquid, the idea there is that the acidic water is going to help the egg whites set a little bit faster. If I was going to poach eggs using the traditional method, I would add vinegar to the water because you run such a big risk of the egg whites spreading out too fast, and it does help the egg whites set a little bit faster. But I also find that it makes like a very sort of thin, kind of almost chalky texture along the exterior of the egg. So using this method, like you don't need to worry about the whites. So I don't add vinegar because I prefer the texture without the vinegar.
Ooh, what kind of a chef's knife are you using? Funny, you can read all about it on Serious Eats.
Yeah, so this chef's knife I'm using right now is from this company called Misen. They just launched their Kickstarter this morning. They sent me this knife about a week ago, and it's become one of my new favorite knives. It's high carbon steel. It's got a polycarbonate handle. It's like a super high quality, really well balanced chef's knife. I mean, this is about, you know, I collect knives. I have tons of knives, and this is one of my favorite knives. And the best part is it's $65, which most knives are like in the $130, $180 range. I would highly recommend backing them on Kickstarter, getting this knife in March.
What's your favorite recipe in your book?
That didn't make it in the book.
Oh, that didn't make it in the
favorite
book?
Recipe that didn't
I
make
want
it
to
in
know
the
what's
book.
your favorite one in the book, too. Both.
Well, I was in the fortunate position where, so originally I was supposed to write a 300-page book. That's what was in my contract. And it was supposed to take a year to write. It was going to come out in like 2011 or 2012. And then by the time 2012 rolled around, I was up to 800 pages. And I gave it to my editor, and I thought she was going to kill me. And then she was like, this is good. Can you give me another 800 pages? And I was like, okay. So I took another year and wrote another 800 pages. So I was in the fortunate position where I really didn't have to cut anything. So by the time that rolled around, that was like the end of 2013, I was at 1,600 pages. We were going to release a 2-volume box set. And then it turns out that booksellers don't want to sell a $100 book from a first-time author. So we're like, okay, we can cut it down to one book. So we cut it down to 1,000 pages. So there's 600 pages worth of recipes and things that I really like. Fortunately, they're going to come out in another book. So I'm adding to that, and there's going to be another probably 1,000-page book that's coming out in maybe 2 years, maybe 1 year. We'll see. So the recipes that I really liked that got cut from this book are going to be in that book. But out of those recipes, I would say the hardest things to cut were probably pizza, and I have a lot of thoughts on nachos too. There's no nachos in this.
Don't we all? What's your favorite thing in the book?
Oh, that's also hard.
It's not your children. They won't know.
No, it's because I forgot. I wrote this book like years ago. I forgot them all. All right. So if you're gonna make the first recipe you're gonna make out of there, I would recommend making the stovetop macaroni and cheese, because it's literally takes the same amount of time as it does to open up like a box of Kraft mac and cheese and make it, but it's so much better, and it has that same sort of gooey, creamy cheesiness that, you know, and it's one of my favorite recipes in there. I'd say easy, delicious, really bad for you. A change from the Google food here.
We like everything in moderation. Ooh, how could you adapt the mac and cheese recipe for backpacking?
Well, it's actually, almost custom made for backpacking. So in the recipe, you basically, the only element that I think you would have to leave out is the egg. But so it has a variety of emulsifiers in there that help that sauce stay creamy. So there's condensed milk, which comes in a can, perfect for backpacking. There's cornstarch. And then there's a small amount of American cheese, which contains chemical salt, sodium citrate, chemical salts that help cheeses melt and stay emulsified. And then a large amount of good cheese, like cheddar cheese. So cheeses are good for backpacking. Everything there except for the egg, and then the pasta is dry. So and then it all cooks in one pot. You cook the pasta, you drain it, then you throw everything else in there, and that's it. It's pretty easy for backpacking, actually.
Unusual tips for egg-based desserts.
So desserts are not my forte. They're not my strong suit, and there are actually no desserts in this recipe, in this book. It's something that I say right at the introduction, like I just don't like dessert, so I don't do it.
Whoa!
Because I made a deal with myself about 5 years ago that I'm not going to do things that I don't like anymore, which I think is a deal everybody should make with themselves. And so I was like, all right, I'm not doing desserts.
Oh, what is your favorite Bay Area restaurant, and what is the best Google cafe?
To be 100% honest, I don't actually get out to eat in the Bay Area much because I cook so much at home. I've had some great meals. So we live in San Mateo. I've had some really great meals at 31st Union. I like Santa Ramen down there, and Dojo Ramen is pretty nice. I had some good pizza at Doppio Zero in Mountain View. In San Francisco, I would say, I've always loved Mission Chinese food. Everybody loves that. Pal's Takeaway, the sandwich shop. It's great. It's in the back of Tony's Market. It's not a full restaurant. It's just a guy making sandwiches, but they're the best. Prune, not prune. No, I had great prunes at Francis. Francis in the Castro, and Kin Cow. Really like Kin Cow, Thai restaurant in the Tenderloin thing. Oh, and favorite cafe. I don't remember the names. Does anyone who work in this one? This is my favorite one, right? Yeah.
Kitchen sink for the win. How would you do in a cooking competition?
Kick ass.
Obviously.
I don't know. Let's see. I mean, I used to work in restaurants, but I haven't worked in restaurants now for 7 or 8 years, I think, maybe even longer. So I think probably my speed has suffered, but I think I'm a pretty good cook. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer.
Do you miss the restaurant life?
I do. I mean, I miss the adrenaline, and I miss like the rush of service, and I miss all, and I miss like the camaraderie of a kitchen is really nice. I definitely don't miss the hours. I don't miss not having holidays. I don't miss not having weekends. So some elements I definitely miss, but overall it's a good change to get out of restaurants.
How are home cooks wasting their time? They could be doing something more efficient.
I think mostly it just comes down to kitchen organization. Particularly, I think people waste a lot of time by becoming cluttered. Like a lot of people will cook and they'll just like throw their dirty things as soon as they're done with them. They'll like leave them on their cutting board, and then you have a nice big cutting board, and then you end up with like chopped herbs over here and like half a chopped onion over here and like some pepper skins over here, and then you're trying to work in like a space this big, and that's not efficient. So I think the number one way to make yourself more efficient in the kitchen is really clean as you go, stay organized, and also like just think of it as think of yourself as sort of like a production line. Maybe it's like a not fun way to think about cooking, but I think it makes it more fun in the end. So if you're chopping up like 5 pounds of onions for an onion soup, rather than working one onion at a time and getting it all chopped, I'll do actually one step at a time. So I'll take every onion and I'll cut off the ends, and then I'll take every onion and split them in half. Then I'll take every onion and peel them, and that way you have like less extraneous movements, less cleaning up, and it's just much more organized and faster.
How do you feel about egg politics? Cage-free,
So there's,
organic.
There's two sides to that question. There's the flavor side, and then there's the politics side. As far as the politics side go, I think you buy it from best chickens, the most nicely treated chickens. I mean, the commercial egg industry and the milk and the dairy industry are two of the worst industries in the world, like way worse than the meat industries. Battery chicken hens are treated really poorly. So I would recommend buying cage-free. If you have a local farmer, even better. I would definitely do that for political reasons. As far as flavor reasons go, a lot of people say they can taste the difference between a cage-free egg or a commercial egg or something from their neighbor's yard. Every test I've ever seen and every test I've ever done, side-by-side blind taste test, you can't tell the difference. They cook the same way. They'll have differences in appearance. And this is actually, this is a test I've done with large crowds before. You can show people 2 pictures, exact same egg, just Photoshop the egg, and one of them's a little bit more orange. The orange egg is going to be more appetizing. And similarly, if you're making scrambled eggs, if you want, this is another brunch tip. If you want your friends to have the best tasting scrambled eggs they've ever had in their life, just add a few drops of orange food coloring to the eggs while you're scrambling them, and they'll be like, oh my God, these are like, tell them you got them from your neighbor. They'll be like, oh my God, these are the most flavorful eggs ever. And really, it's all just psychosomatic. But at the same time, it really does taste better to them. So I think that's a good thing. So if you can get if you can buy better eggs, and knowing the fact that those eggs came from happier chickens and they're more orange, if that actually really makes it taste better to you, then it's like, then who cares if in a blind taste test they don't, right? That's not what's important. Is what's in your mouth, what's in your brain, like not what a blind taste test shows you.
Does size matter of eggs? Only for eggs, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly if in a baking recipe it matters because if you use different size eggs, it's going to throw off the ratio of a baking recipe.
What's the right size?
Most recipes are written for large eggs. I like to sometimes get like jumbo eggs, just if I'm going to poach them or fry them, because it's nice to have like a nice big yolk. My mom used to go to a store that would sell the double yolked eggs for fried eggs, and she really liked those. But yeah, in general, no. I mean, as far as flavor and like basic chemical profile goes, it doesn't really matter.
The hardest thing about writing a recipe?
Foolproofing. It's trying to figure out everything that an end user might do wrong and guarding against that. So when you look at recipes in this book or on Serious Eats or any place where there's good, really well written, well tested recipes, what you'll find that I always try and offer like several different cues for when something is done. So I start with a visual cue. So I'll say cook it until the onions are translucent, and then after that I also offer like a basic timing cue. So a poorly written recipe would be cook the onions for 5 minutes over medium heat, and that's poorly written because like you don't know how much power this one was cooking at 1,000. I don't know what that means. Is that medium? Like I don't know. And most people at home, like their gas ranges vary so much, so you don't know what medium heat means. Secondly, like you don't know what kind of pan they're going to have. Are they going to have like an aluminum pan? Are they going to have a really thin non-stick pan? Are they going to have a stainless steel pan? So you can specify all those things, but even within the range of like stainless steel pans, there's a broad range. So it's always much better to give like a visual cue and say like cook the onions while you're stirring until they're translucent. This will take about 3 to 5 minutes, maybe, something like that. That way you're making sure that people are really using their ears and their eyes, and that's how you should be cooking. Always, use a timer, use a thermometer, but always time things first with your eyes and your ears and your nose and your fingers.
Who eats all the leftovers from your experiments?
So sometimes my wife. It depends on if it's a recipe she likes or not. And if it's a recipe she likes, by the end of it, it's a recipe she hates because she'll eat boiled eggs for like 3 weeks straight. Sometimes it's my wife. Sometimes when I lived in New York, I lived near my family, so I would give it away to my mom or my grandfather. I would take it into the office, my neighbors, my doorman. Now we live in San Mateo next to a family that has 2 kids, and so they get a lot of our food. The dogs get a lot of food too. The dogs had Wagyu steak for breakfast a couple weeks ago. Lucky.
What's your favorite thing to order when you eat out?
It depends what kind of restaurant, but if it's like your typical California cuisine, vegetables. I order vegetables and fish when I eat out. I think if you want to really like if you're going to like a high-end restaurant or even like a really nice mid-range restaurant, I think the 2 best dishes to judge a restaurant on are actually generally the most boring. So I think it's a salad and the chicken. And those 2 things, if they can do it right, those things like are oftentimes like they're almost afterthoughts. They're things like, oh, we have to have a salad and a chicken. But if they show like care and attention when they're doing that, and like perfectly cooked chicken, I think can be amazingly tasty. And like a really perfectly dressed salad, like with a properly made vinaigrette, well-balanced ingredients, like that can also be really, really tasty. So if a restaurant does those 2 things right, then I'm like pretty sure that they care about everything else.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.